All right, everybody, settle down. Today I'm going to tell you something that changed my life. I'm going to tell you how to read. Now you're thinking, I already know how to read. I learned that in first grade. No. You learned how to look at words and understand what they mean? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how to read so that what you read actually stays in your brain. How to read so that a year later you remember it. How to read so that you can actually use what you learned. Most people read books and 2 weeks later they remember almost nothing. It's like pouring water into a bucket with holes in it. Sure, the water goes in, but it all leaks out. We're going to plug those holes. Let me tell you a story. When I was at MIT, there was this guy in my dorm who was always reading. Always. He'd read 5, 6 books a week. He was incredibly well read. He could tell you the name of every book, every author, what it was about. But here's the thing. One day we were talking about some problem. I don't remember what it was. And I mentioned an idea that could help. And he said, oh yeah, I read about that. It was in such and such book. So I said, okay, well, what did the book say we should do about it? And he just stared at me. He couldn't remember. He'd read the book. He could tell me the title, the author, even what chapter it was in. But he couldn't tell me what it actually said. He couldn't use the information. That's when I realized something important. Reading is not the same as learning. You can read 100 books and learn nothing. You can read 1 book and learn everything. The difference is how you read. Think about reading like building a house. Most people, when they read, they're like somebody walking through a construction site looking at piles of bricks. They see the bricks, they admire them, they think, wow, nice bricks, and then they walk away. A week later, if you ask them about the bricks, they'll say, oh yeah, I saw some bricks once. They were brick colored. I think there were a lot of them. That's useless. What you need to do is actually build the house. You need to take those bricks and put them together into a structure that stands up, a structure you can use, a structure you can walk into a year later and say, ah, yes, I built this. I know every room. So how do you do that? How do you turn bricks into a house? Step 1, read with a question in mind. Here's the first secret. Never start reading unless you have a question you're trying to answer. Never. Most people pick up a book and just start reading from page 1. They're passive. They're letting the author pour information into their heads. And that information just sloshes around and leaks out. Instead, before you even open the book, you need to ask yourself, what do I want to know? What problem am I trying to solve? What question am I trying to answer? Let me give you an example. Say you pick up a book about World War II. If you just start reading, you'll get lost in a million details. Dates, names, battles, treaties. It'll all blur together. But if before you start, you ask yourself a specific question, like, why did Germany lose the war? Now you have a mission. Now every page you read, you're hunting. You're looking for pieces that answer your question. You're active, not passive. It's like the difference between wandering through a grocery store randomly looking at stuff versus going in with a shopping list. With a list, you know what you're looking for. You're efficient. You're purposeful. Reading without a question is like shopping without a list. You end up with a lot of stuff you don't need and you forget half of what you wanted. Step 2, argue with the book. Here's the second secret, and this is crucial. You have to argue with what you're reading. Most people read and they just accept everything. The author says something and they think, okay, I guess that's true. Then they move on. No, you have to fight back. You have to question everything. When you read something, ask yourself, is this really true? How do they know? What's the evidence? Could it be wrong? Is there another way to interpret this? Imagine the author is sitting across from you at a table. You're having an argument, not a mean argument, a friendly one, a debate. They say something and you say, wait a minute, prove it. They show you their evidence and you say, okay, but what about this other thing? This does 2 things. First, it keeps you engaged. You're not just passively absorbing, you're actively thinking. Your brain is working hard, making connections, evaluating. Second, and this is the important part, it forces you to really understand what you're reading. You can't argue with something unless you understand it. If you're confused about what the author is saying, you'll notice immediately when you try to argue with him. Let me tell you what I used to do. When I was reading physics papers, I'd literally take a pencil and write in the margins. I'd write things like, no, this is wrong because, or how do you know this? Or this contradicts what you said on page 5. Sometimes I'd realize I was wrong and the author was right. That's fine, that's learning. The point is, I was engaged. I was thinking. I wasn't just letting words flow past my eyeballs. Step 3, explain it to yourself out loud. Now here's the real secret. This is the thing that changed everything for me. After you read something, close the book and explain it out loud to yourself, as if you're teaching it to a child. I'm serious, out loud, not in your head. Actually say the words. Pretend there's a 12-year-old sitting next to you who's really curious but doesn't know anything about the topic. And you have to explain it to them in simple words so they understand. If you can't do this, you don't understand, period. I don't care if you just read it. I don't care if you highlighted every other sentence. If you can't explain it simply, you don't get it. This is what I call the Feynman Technique, though I never called it that. Other people called it that later. But it's simple. If you can't explain something in simple terms, you don't understand it. Here's why this works. When you explain something, you have to organize the information in your head. You have to figure out what's important and what's not. You have to find the connections between ideas. You have to translate complex language into simple language. All of that is real learning. That's when the information moves from your short-term memory, where it'll disappear in a day, into your long-term memory, where it'll stay forever. Let me show you how it works. Okay, let me demonstrate. Say you just read a chapter about how the heart works. You close the book. Now explain it. Most people would say something like, well, the heart pumps blood through the body using chambers, and there's oxygen involved, and I don't know, it's complicated. That's no good. That means you didn't really learn it. Instead, you should be able to say something like, okay, imagine the heart is like a house with 4 rooms, 2 rooms on the left, 2 on the right. Blood comes into the top right room from the body. This blood is tired. It's used up all its oxygen. Then it goes down to the bottom right room, which squeezes and pushes it to the lungs. In the lungs, the blood picks up fresh oxygen, like refueling a car. Then it comes back to the top left room of the heart. From there, it goes to the bottom left room, which is the strongest room. This one squeezes hard and pushes the fresh blood out to the whole body. Then the cycle starts again. See the difference? In the second explanation, you're using simple words. You're using analogies, like rooms in a house and refueling a car. You're telling a story with a logical flow. If you can do that, you understand it. And more importantly, you'll remember it. The difference between knowing the name and understanding, let me tell you something that bugs me. There's a difference between knowing the name of something and understanding what it is. I learned this from my father. We'd be walking in the woods and he'd point at a bird. He'd say, Richard, see that bird? You could look in a bird book and learn that in English it's called a brown-throated thrush. In German, it's called a Halsenvogel. In Chinese, it's called a chungling. And after you know all those names, you still know nothing about the bird. You only know what different people in different places call it. Now, he'd say, let's watch what it does. See how it pecks at the ground? It's looking for insects. See how it turns its head? That's because its eyes are on the side, so it has to turn to see in front. See how it hops? That's because its legs are built for perching, not walking. That's understanding. That's real knowledge. The same thing happens with reading. Most people read, and they learn the names of things, they learn the vocabulary, they learn the fancy terms, and they think they understand. But they don't. They just memorized labels. Real understanding is when you can explain why things work the way they do, when you can predict what will happen in new situations, when you can take the idea and apply it to something else, making connections, the spider web. Here's another way to think about it. Your brain is like a spider web of knowledge. Every piece of information you know is a point on that web. And the connections between those points, those are the strings of the web. When most people read, they're adding new points to the web, but they're not connecting them to anything. So you've got all these isolated points floating around, not connected to the rest of your knowledge. And isolated points are easy to forget. They just drift away. What you need to do is connect every new piece of information to stuff you already know. You need to say, oh, this is like that thing I learned before. Or, this is the opposite of that other thing. Or, this explains why that thing I observed happens. Every connection you make strengthens the web. And the stronger the web, the harder it is to forget things. Let me give you an example. Say you're reading about the French Revolution, and you learn about the Committee of Public Safety executing people during the Terror. If you just memorize that fact, it's an isolated point. You'll forget it. But if you connect it, you might think, oh, this is like what happened in other revolutions too. The Russian Revolution had the Red Terror. The Chinese Revolution had the Cultural Revolution. There seems to be a pattern where revolutions eat their own children. Why is that? Maybe it's because when you overthrow all the rules, there's no stable way to determine who has power, so everyone fights everyone. That's interesting. Now you're not just memorizing one fact about the French Revolution. You're understanding a pattern about revolutions in general, and you've connected it to other things you know. Now it'll stick. Take notes, but not the way you think. People always ask me, should I take notes when I read? The answer is yes, but not the way most people do it. Most people take notes by copying down what the book says. They highlight sentences. They write down quotes. They make neat, organized outlines. This is almost useless because you're just copying. You're not thinking. Your brain is not engaged. Instead, take notes in your own words. Better yet, take notes as questions and arguments. When you read something interesting, don't write down what the book said. Write down what you think about what the book said. Write down questions it raises. Write down ways it connects to other things you know. Write down things you disagree with. My notebooks were a mess. They had diagrams, questions, arguments, little stories I made up to remember things. They weren't organized at all, but they were mine. They were my thoughts, my understanding, not the author's words copied down. And here's the thing. I almost never went back and read my notes. The value wasn't in having the notes to look at later. The value was in the process of making them. The thinking I did while writing was what made the information stick. Read multiple things on the same topic. Here's something else I discovered. If you really want to understand something, don't just read one book about it. Read 3 or 4. Why? Because each author has a different perspective. Each one emphasizes different things. Each one explains it in a different way. When you read multiple books on the same topic, you start to see what's essential and what's just one person's opinion. You see the same ideas explained different ways, which helps you understand the idea itself, not just one particular explanation. It's like looking at a sculpture from different angles. If you only look from one side, you might think it's flat, but walk around it. You see it's three-dimensional. You see details you missed before, you understand the whole thing better. Plus, when different authors disagree with each other, that's gold. That means there's something interesting going on. That means you need to think carefully and figure out who's right, or maybe they're both partially right, or maybe neither is right and the truth is something else entirely. That process of comparing and evaluating different perspectives, that's when deep understanding happens. The bathroom test, I have a simple test for whether I really understand something. I call it the bathroom test. Imagine you're at a party and you're in the bathroom washing your hands. Someone else comes in. They ask what you're studying or what you're reading about. You've got maybe 2 minutes while you're both standing there. Can you explain it to them in those 2 minutes in a way that's interesting and clear, using no jargon? If you can, you understand it. If you can't, you don't. It's that simple. I used to practice this all the time. I'd be reading about some physics concept and I'd imagine explaining it to my wife or to my neighbor or to a random person at a party. If I couldn't make it clear and interesting in just a few sentences, I'd go back and study it more. The bathroom test forces you to find the essence of an idea. That's the core insight. What's the thing that actually matters? Strip away all the technical details, all the complicated language, all the fancy mathematics. What's left? If you can find that essence and explain it simply, you've really learned something. Reading fast versus reading well. People always want to know how to read faster. They take speed reading courses. They try to train their eyes to move faster down the page. This is missing the point entirely. The goal is not to read fast. The goal is to understand and remember. And that takes time. That takes thinking. That takes stopping and arguing and explaining to yourself. I was never a fast reader. I'd spend an hour on 3 pages sometimes if the material was dense. But when I was done with those 3 pages, I understood them. I could explain them. I could use the ideas. I could connect them to other things. Meanwhile, other people would breeze through 50 pages in an hour. But a week later, they'd remember almost nothing. Who learned more? Me with my 3 pages, or them with their 50? Reading is not a race. It's not about how many books you can get through. It's about how much you can understand and remember and use. I'd rather read 1 book deeply than 10 books shallowly. When to read fast? Having said that, there is a time to read fast. Not all reading has to be deep. If you're just scanning for information, if you're trying to figure out if a book is worth reading carefully, if you're just looking for one specific fact, then sure, skim, read fast, skip around. But when you find something important, when you find something you really want to understand, slow down, stop, think, argue, explain to yourself. That's when real learning happens. I used to do this with physics papers. I'd skim through quickly to get the main idea. Is this interesting? Is this relevant to what I'm working on? If not, fine, I'm done. 2 minutes, move on. But if it was interesting, then I'd go back to the beginning and read it carefully, slowly, working through every equation, asking myself if I agreed with each step, trying to see if there was a simpler way to derive the result. Sometimes taking days to really understand one paper. You have to be selective. You can't read everything deeply. There's too much. But when you find something worth understanding, give it the time it deserves. For the 2-pass method, let me tell you my method for reading technical books, like textbooks or serious nonfiction. I call it the 2-pass method. First pass, read through quickly. Don't worry about understanding everything. Just get the big picture. What's this chapter about? What are the main ideas? What are the conclusions? This is like looking at a map before you start a journey. You want to know where you're going, what the major landmarks are, how it all fits together. Don't take notes on the first pass. Don't stop and struggle with things you don't understand. Just get the overview. Second pass, now go back and read carefully. This time stop when you don't understand something. Work through the examples, do the problems, argue with the author, explain concepts to yourself out loud. This is the real reading. This is where learning happens. The reason the 2-pass method works is that on the second pass you already have context. You know where the chapter is going, You know which parts are important. When you hit a difficult concept, you can see how it fits into the bigger picture. That makes it easier to understand. It's like watching a movie twice. The first time, you're just following the plot. The second time, you notice all the details, all the foreshadowing, all the subtle stuff you missed before. Making it stick. Spaced repetition. Okay, so you've read something carefully. You've argued with it. You've explained it to yourself. You understand it. Great. But here's the problem. You'll forget it. Not right away, but eventually. It's just how memory works. So here's what you do. Come back to it later, not immediately. Wait a day, wait a week, then try to explain it again without looking at the book. You'll find you forgot some details. That's fine. Look them up, refresh your memory, explain it again. Then wait longer, a month. Try to explain it again. Each time you successfully recall something, you're strengthening that memory. You're making it more permanent. This is called spaced repetition, and it's one of the most powerful learning techniques we know. The mistake most people make is they study something once, right before they need it. They cram for a test. They read a book right before they need to use the information, and then they never think about it again. That's the worst way to learn. Everything just disappears from memory. Instead, spread it out. Review things multiple times over a long period. Each review can be quick, just a few minutes, but those multiple exposures over time, that's what makes knowledge permanent. I used to keep a list of concepts I wanted to remember. Every few weeks, I'd go through the list and try to explain each one to myself. The ones I'd forgotten, I'd study again. The ones I remembered easily, I'd move to a longer interval before the next review. Teaching is the best learning. You know what the absolute best way to learn something is? Teach it to someone else. When you teach, you can't fake it. The student will ask questions you didn't think of. They'll be confused by things you thought were obvious. They'll force you to explain things in different ways until they get it. All of that makes your own understanding deeper. I learned more physics from teaching than I ever did from reading textbooks. Every time I had to prepare a lecture, I'd discover gaps in my own understanding. Every time a student asked a question, I'd have to think harder about the fundamentals. Now you might say, but I'm not a teacher. I don't have students. That's okay. Teach anyway. Explain things to your friends. Start a blog, make videos. Find someone, anyone, who wants to learn about what you're learning, and teach them. Or teach to an imaginary person. I used to do this all the time. I'd imagine I was giving a lecture to a class. I'd explain concepts out loud to my empty room, writing on an imaginary chalkboard, answering imaginary questions. Poppy probably thought I was crazy, but it worked. Teaching forces you to organize information clearly. It forces you to find the essence of ideas. It forces you to discover what you don't understand. And here's a secret. You don't have to be an expert to teach. You just have to know a little more than the person you're teaching. In fact, sometimes beginners make the best teachers because they remember what it's like to be confused. They know which parts are hard. They know what analogies help. A Feynman algorithm for reading okay. Let me put this all together into a simple algorithm. Here's how to read so you actually remember everything. Step 1. Before you start reading, write down what you want to learn. What's your question? What problem are you trying to solve? Step 2. Read with that question in mind. Be active, not passive. Look for answers to your question. Step 3. As you read, argue with the author. Question everything. Don't just accept what's written. Step 4. After you read a section, close the book. Explain what you just read out loud as if teaching a child. Use simple words. Use analogies. Tell a story. Step 5. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it yet. Go back and read it again. Figure out what you're missing. Step 6. Write notes in your own words. Don't copy from the book. Write your thoughts, your questions, your connections to other ideas. Step 7. Connect new information to things you already know. How is it similar? How is it different? Why does it work this way? Step 8. Come back later and try to explain it again. A day later. A week later. A month later. Each time you successfully recall it, you're making it permanent. Step 9. Teach it to someone else. Or pretend to teach it. Teaching is the ultimate test of understanding. That's it. That's the algorithm. It's simple, but it's not easy. It takes work. It takes time. It takes mental effort, but it works. I promise you it works. Why most people never do this? Now here's the thing. Most people will read this and think, yeah, that makes sense. And then they'll go back to reading the old way. Passive, fast, forgetting everything a week later. Why? Because the method I'm describing takes effort. It's slow. It's harder. Your brain has to work. Most people want learning to be easy. They want to absorb information effortlessly, like downloading data into a computer. But that's not how brains work. Learning requires effort. Understanding requires thinking. Memory requires repetition. The good news is, the effort gets easier with practice. The first time you try to explain something out loud to yourself, it feels weird and awkward. But the 10th time, The 100th time, it becomes natural. And here's the amazing thing. Once you learn how to learn this way, you can learn anything, any subject, any skill, any body of knowledge. The method is the same. Most people think some people are just naturally smart, naturally good at learning. That's not true. Or it's only a tiny part of the story. The bigger part is that some people have learned how to learn. They've developed the habits and techniques that make learning effective, and you can develop those same habits, starting right now, with whatever you're reading next. Let me tell you one more story. When I was at Los Alamos during the war, working on the bomb, we had all these security restrictions. We couldn't talk about our work outside the lab. We couldn't take documents home. Everything was secret. But I noticed something interesting. Some guys would work on a problem all day, then go home and forget about it. The next morning, they'd have to spend an hour just remembering where they were, what they were working on. Other guys, they'd leave the lab, but they'd keep thinking about the problem. They couldn't help it. They'd be lying in bed at night, and their brain would keep churning. They'd think of new approaches, new angles, new connections. The second group solved more problems, not because they were smarter, but because they were engaged. The problems were alive in their minds. They couldn't stop thinking about them. That's what real learning is. It's when the ideas become alive in your mind, when you can't stop thinking about them, when you see connections everywhere, when you dream about them. And you can't get there by reading passively. You can't get there by memorizing. You can only get there by thinking deeply, by questioning, by explaining, by connecting. That's what I'm trying to teach you. Not just how to remember what you read, but how to make ideas come alive in your mind. Because when ideas are alive, when they're part of you, when you've truly understood them and made them your own, that's when learning becomes exciting. That's when learning becomes fun. That's when you can use what you've learned to solve real problems, to create new things, to understand the world. That's what reading should be. Not a chore, not something you do because you have to, but an adventure, an exploration, a way of making the world make sense. So go ahead, pick up a book, ask a question, read actively, argue, explain, connect, teach. And remember, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it yet. And that's okay. That just means you get to keep learning. And learning, real learning, is one of the greatest joys in life. Now go read something, and actually remember it this time.